United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item that I'd like to talk about, ahead of additions or deletions to the agenda, is the absence tonight of Ann Jaworowski. Ann has decided to retire from the Planning Commission. She's 97 years old and decided at this point that it was time to bring in some fresh blood to participate on the Planning Commission. Ann Jaworowski has been a treasure for this community. She's been on this commission for various years, for well over 35 years. And her knowledge and experience, her decision making, the clarity of thought, I think has helped the commission to make the right decisions at the right time for the community. And even on a personal note, I remember, I was elected to chair some 20 years ago. And I'd only been on the commission for maybe a year, something like that. And I got elected to be chair, and then my first comment was, now what? Well, Ann Jaworowski, who was not even on the commission at that point, she called me up and said, John, I'd like to help you. I've been chair of the commission. I know how to do it, and I think I can give you some advice and guidance that would help you to do a good job for the community. So she took her time. I went over to her house, and we spent several hours going through materials, going through strategies about how to effectively run meetings, how to engage everybody on the commission so that everybody gets their input, and we collectively move forward. She just out of the goodness of her heart did that for me, and basically she mentored me. And that was something that was just above and beyond the call of duty. And I just thought that was really wonderful. And when subsequently, I guess a couple of years later, she got reappointed to the Planning Commission, I was very glad to see her. She got elected secretary, and she sat there next to me for many, many years. And she's just a gem. And I, for one, thank her sincerely for all she did for the community and all she did for me. And I wish her the best. And so, I would entertain a motion from everybody, please, to recognize Ann for the fine work for the community.
I absolutely would like to make that motion using the same words that you did, right? Ann was absolutely a treasure for the community, and over 30-some years of experience on the planning commission's not an easy task. So I definitely move that we recognize Ann's hard work and dedication to the Planning Commission and to the community in general.
Thank you, Eric. I'll call the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And you will be missed. So moving on to the next item, it's a good thing our supervisor is here tonight because at this point our commission is down to 7. Okay, we have 2 openings. And we're always asking, people of the community who want to contribute to the planning process to submit their applications. The appointments are made by Supervisor Loftus and then voted on by the Board of Trustees. And we do have openings, and this is a good, challenging thing for people who want to contribute to their community, and we would ask people looking at from the audience to consider it. And if so, turn your application in for Brian to take a look at. As far as the other things relative to the Secretary's position, obviously that is open at the moment. At the end of the meeting, I'm going to ask for nominations, and we're going to vote on replacing Ann in the Secretary position, and at the same time talk about the second position that we need to fill, and that is to support the Zoning Board of Appeals. The Planning Commission has a representative on the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the Commission had designated Ann to fill that role, and she did so for many years. But obviously now we need to pick a new representative, so the those are separate issues, and under the chair's report, we will talk about that and see if we can come up with names and participants for these new positions, or for these positions. Everybody okay with that?
Sounds good.
Okay. Then let's move on to the agenda itself, additions and/or deletions to the agenda. Does anybody want to change the agenda from that submitted? Hearing no comments, I'll entertain a motion to accept the agenda as presented.
Before you do that, we would just like to amend the order in which we do things.
Okay?
We do have some applicants in-house today, so I would move that we do the zoning regulations pertaining to waste receptacles in the front of the discussion items versus the end of the discussion items.
Okay, we'll move item 2, basically to item 1 under discussion. Agreed? Is that the motion?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second. Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Eric, support from Steve. Discussion. Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We'll adjust the numbers under discussion accordingly. The next item is the approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of June the 2nd. Were there any comments on those minutes? Mickey?
Nope, I think they look good.
Steve?
No changes.
Jim?
No changes.
Eric?
None.
Okay. To entertain a motion to approve the minutes from June the 2nd as...
We got one more.
Yeah, Brian, too.
Oh, Brian, I didn't see you come in down there. Excuse me, sir.
Like a ninja today.
Brian, did you have any comments on these?
No, none.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you for down there. Okay. I entertain a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
So moved.
Eric, support from, motion from Eric, support.
Support.
Support from Brian. Discussion, hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We'll move to the next item, which is public comment, an opportunity for any citizens who wish to speak with the commission about any items not on the agenda to speak. Sir, any? Okay. Then on that basis, we'll move past public comment to the first item of discussion. Zoning regulations pertaining to waste receptacle enclosures. A little background on this first. Probably a month ago, give or take, I received an email that came kind of roundabout through the township, originated by Brian, asking a question about the zoning ordinance standards for waste receptacles, specifically the requirements that we have regarding the enclosures around dumpsters and trash bins, and the manner in which that's constructed. And he was questions were asked regarding whether the standards that we applied were in fact the most logical given the current materials that are out there in order to make these enclosures. Our requirements are mortar and brick, okay, and there are other options that he asked that this planning commission consider. So on that basis, I spoke with Brian to kind of investigate this. He did so, and has a summary in his email. And I don't know if you have a presentation with us or not, or you're going to simply talk to it.
Yeah, I didn't prepare anything formal tonight, Mr. Chair. Just figured we would kind of have a discussion.
Yeah, this exactly is that. It's a discussion. Depending on what the determination of the Planning Commission members is, then we would, if the idea is that we want to make a change, then that would precipitate a public hearing and a number of other steps down the road to make those changes. But again, it's entirely up to the majority of the commission. So on that note, I will stop. Brian, do you want to talk through this issue, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't have a whole lot. What I was asked to do really was to do a little bit of research just to see what other types of regulation I could find. I did so first and foremost by starting with the ordinances that I'm familiar with, the ordinances that I work with on a daily and weekly basis, which amounts to anywhere from about 8 to a dozen different communities, including the township. The predominant requirement is for a masonry enclosure. There is usually some discretion that will allow for the use of treated lumber as opposed to the masonry, which can be a little bit more cost effective depending upon the nature of the location, depending upon what the surrounding land uses are, its visibility from off-site, etc. Typically, most communities want to see them blend in with the site. It's a site feature. More times than not, you'll see a requirement that it match the materials used on the principal building, which again is to try to create a cohesive site such that we don't have a lot of different elements and different materials throughout a given property. But of course, again, with certain properties, there are different levels of visibility. There's different levels of what you might consider the character of a property, et cetera, at which point you might wish to consider something else. I also checked a few others because the truth of the matter is checking only my own ordinances is relatively biased and it doesn't really give you a very good cross-section given that myself and or Jeff and or Brad, who have worked with the township for many years, probably drafted most of those ordinances. So the consistency there was to be expected. So what I did was I did some checks through MuniCode of some other downriver communities, and I was able to relatively easily find regulations in Woodhaven, Trenton, and Riverview. There were a few others that were a little cumbersome trying to sort through their ordinances, so at some point I kind of gave up. But based on those three, I also found similarities to what the township's current ordinance states or regulates, and again, which is consistent with what most communities that I work with would require with respect to a waste receptacle enclosure. So that was really the gist of my research. The rest of what I put into my memo really is just more opinion, and that is why I think that is the regulation and why that is so common and such a consistent standard from community to community. And then the first really is tied to visibility and aesthetics. I do think that nobody wants to just see an open dumpster sitting out in the middle of a parking lot. That's not a good look for anyone. They do have the ability, the tendency to move from place to place when they do not have, a physical enclosure, and then nobody wants to look at them. Whether it's from views from a road, whether it's views from off-site, whether the adjacent surrounding uses are less intensive or more intensive, it's just not something that people generally want to look at. And then the other aspect of it is really the durability component, and that's, I think, where my primary concern would come in. The way this topic came up, and I probably should have stated this from the outset, was the way this topic came up was an idea and or a question of why not use a vinyl fence, like a screen fence material, like you might see on a non-waterfront residential property. And that really was my primary concern. It has to do with its durability and its long-term maintenance. What you have to think about is the way these dumpsters are used. First of all, they're very large containers. They don't have to be enormous ones. They can be smaller ones. Even the smaller ones are incredibly heavy, even without any refuse in them. You start to fill them up with materials, obviously they become much heavier. When they are picked up and dropped down, they don't always go up and down in the same exact spot, especially if they are in a hurry and they're slammed down. They have a tendency to wobble. They have a tendency to bounce. And that's where my concern comes in. And that is, should a dumpster, which, again, could weigh anywhere, I did try to do some research on that too, they can weigh anywhere from 500 to several thousand pounds without even being full. And should an object that heavy come down off kilter and catch part of a vinyl screen fence, I'm pretty certain, I've never tested this in the field, I'm pretty certain that screen fence is going to lose, and the dumpster will win that battle. Probably more than 9 times out of 10. But so that's where my concern came in. The idea of masonry, yeah, sure. If it catches the inside of brick or cinder block inside with the brick face, is it going to do some damage? Yeah, it's going to ding it a little bit, but it's not going to collapse it. It's not going to cave it. It's not going to put a giant hole in it that is essentially irreparable. So that's where my concern came in, and I think that's really what I've tried to speak to in the conversations that I've had with some of you, as well as what I put into the memo. That's why I don't believe there's usually that type of a regulation in most communities. I do think you can achieve the screening component by use of that type of a material, as well as maybe some others that we really haven't discussed or thought about. But that would be my primary concern. In the right instance, with the right design, the right location, the right use, could something like that work? Yeah, it's possible that it could work. But I do think there needs to be some recognition of the potential to damage that type of a structure as well, should, again, something occur that maybe we hope doesn't, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to.
Thank you, Brian. Before I go to the audience, any questions anybody has for Brian?
I have a question.
Steve?
So just for a little more background for my own knowledge, are we talking a certain size business? Are we talking, what's the scope of this receptacle discussion?
This has only been tied to waste receptacles, to dumpsters, which are regulated by your ordinance. So there's I believe we have some discretion in terms of when they are required or not required. If a specific business does not technically need to have like a restaurant would clearly need to have on-site waste receptacle. A bank, which utilizes mostly paper and probably shreds a lot, may not actually need a physical waste receptacle to handle all of their refuse. That's something we usually deal with on kind of a business-by-business basis. The particular instance, and not naming names, but the particular reason that this came about was due to the church, and I apologize, I cannot remember which church it was, St. Thomas, which was looking at some alternatives to, again, putting up kind of a very formal, sturdy brick structure. They were looking into some options. What else could they do, again, with the intent of protecting views in particular, and that's where the vinyl fence discussion came about, because it would do that. It would certainly block the views. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And it does have a residential quality to it. And we do find our churches in residential zoning districts. But again, I'll close with my main concern, which I've already stated, but that is just whether it's over time, if it's going to hold up well enough.
Thank you.
Additional questions?
If I
Jay?
could just follow up on that. Following up on that question, am I right that the business determines whether it's going to need external waste receptacle, and then from there, if they do, then our ordinance kicks in? It's not like we determine that a certain type of business requires a trash receptacle and therefore requires an enclosure. Is that right?
Generally, but it is the kind of thing where if we have a site plan come before us and they're not showing one, then we want them to explain to the commission and or the board why they don't need to plan for that, or why they don't need to have one, and what the specific nature of their business is such that they don't need one. So it is something that would certainly come up at some point in the discussion or the review process of a given business. Now, if it was something that was not up for planning commission and or board approval, it's the kind of thing where you're exactly right. If they don't feel they need one and they don't have one and they can function properly that way, so be it. But if they do want to have one, then, or if they do need one, I should say, that would be the other, then they do have to follow your regulations.
Do I also, trying to remember this, it's been a while since I've thought about it, as I recall, there's no distinction between whether it's a, steel dumpster that gets picked up by the big truck, or whether it's hand-carted trash cans and that sort of thing. Is that right? If it's external, it's supposed to be enclosed in one of these things. Is that right?
Yeah, to some degree, but I guess I would, if they're just trash cans, I don't know that somebody would need to come up with a formalized enclosure. I think for the most part, trash cans can be stored. They're usually, you see them stored in a building, quite frankly, and if they're picked up at the curb, they're just brought out just like in a typical neighborhood setting like that you would normally do, whatever your day of the week is. So yeah, that would be something that I guess I don't know that we've encountered. I don't recall anybody proposing push carts with a formalized enclosure area. Again, the intent of the enclosure, the design standards, which include location, they're supposed to be in a rear yard. They are supposed to meet setbacks. I think it's a non-required side yard with planning commission approval. They have to have a reinforced concrete base pad. So really the intent of the regulations is for the large, heavy structure, a dumpster, if you will.
Additional questions?
Yeah, I have 2 questions. The first one is regarding the search that you did for similar type ordinances. And I heard you mention Unicode as well as downriver communities. I was wondering how far did the search go? Did it include others within the Metro Detroit region, like Northville, Plymouth Township, Novi? Did it go across the state, or did it go outside of Michigan looking at?
I was not looking to turn this into a crazy research project where I looked at every single dumpster regulation across Southeast Michigan. I looked at nearby communities, and I looked at my own client communities.
Okay. And were some of those outside the downriver area, or is it just?
Most of them are outside the downriver area, absolutely. But again, I felt there was a good cross-section in terms of communities from county to county. The issue is that the majority of what I found are ordinances that myself and or my company wrote, which again is why you see consistency.
Gotcha. And my second question is in regards to the maintenance. I'm assuming that it would fall under building ordinance inspectors and such, that with any type of receptacle, depending on regardless of the material it's made out of, at a certain point, if it was deemed that it needed to be repaired, the township could send out an officer to say that, hey, this needs to be repaired in X number of days, correct?
Sure. Yeah, my concern is you put up a vinyl fence and it gets bashed, they've got to replace it, and a month later it gets hit again, they got to replace it. 6 months later it gets hit again. I don't see the long-term durability of that type of structure, personally.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, then at this point, we'll go to the audience. Sir, do you wish to speak?
I'll let you introduce because it was
Please give us your name and your address for the record.
Absolutely. My name is Sean Eubank. I'm the pastor at St. Thomas Lutheran Church.
Welcome to the Planning Commission.
My address is 26028 Blossom Lane here in Grossfield.
Welcome to the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Tell us your thoughts.
The whole idea of the dumpster enclosure came about largely because we wanted to find a new solution for handling our garbage. Many of you know we have the Montessori school that meets there at our building. And for whatever reason, raccoons are attracted to diapers. And it has become almost a daily thing trying to clean up after the mess there. And so we explored different dumpster options, found one through Waste Management that is their smallest dumpster. It's only about 4 foot by 2.5 foot approximately. It's a pretty small thing. And we then wanted to enclose it. We quickly rejected, based on cost, doing the masonry type enclosures. Just with limited funds that are, donations, we just didn't want to spend the funds on that. So the wooden one became our immediate, that's allowed in the code, where we start to go. Then in the thought process of that, one of the realities of the wood is if we're going to keep it looking nice, restaining it however many times, and it would, I think, suffer similar problems if a dumpster were slammed into it. In order to mitigate against that, we went larger than the code required, went with a 12 by 13 pad for a dumpster that, if you go its absolute biggest, is about 3 by 5, giving it a nice area in there, and then using parking blocks to kind of keep it away from those edges. And now it may not hold up, and we may run into exactly the problems that Brian describes. We didn't envision that, but that's where we were. For us, we thought the vinyl, and I'll make it a selfish statement, if it gets up and it doesn't get taken out by the dumpsters, that thing's there after I retire and I'm dead, without having to do a whole lot of maintenance other than wash it and do whatever. And that seemed very appealing to us. I want to be clear, though, that I'm a pastor, not a building person, and let's, be very honest about that. And I don't necessarily come seeking to change codes that will apply in all times and places and everything like that. But where we are with the size we are and what we're doing and the resources we have for ongoing maintenance, things like that, it seemed like a good and acceptable thing to go with that, which is why I asked for this possibility to be granted to us.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of points. First, Brian, was this referred to ZBA?
No,
Was there a reason?
no formal request was ever made. This has basically been under discussion for the last few months,
Okay.
but there was nothing formal ever submitted or.
Okay, would you talk to the pastor, talk to the pastor, please, about zoning board of appeals? Perhaps he's not aware of that as an option to a zoning change, and what the difference would be between us changing an ordinance for everybody
Sure.
versus a zoning board of appeals
Sure.
application.
Yeah, the opportunity would be to seek a variance from the zoning board of appeals. The review would be based on the specific conditions of your site and your property, which again we'd only be looking at your specific instance, if you will. What the chairman, I think, is getting at is, conversely, if the ordinance is amended, then that is opened up township-wide. That would affect everybody. Going in front of ZBA affects only you and your property, as opposed to basically opening this up for consideration by anyone in the township.
And factors that the zoning board of appeals would consider, for example, would be the specific location, the neighbors, visibility off-site, the size of the dumpster relative to the size of the container, on and on. I mean, they're specifically geared to one-time situations where the uniqueness of the application warrants a variance from the standard ordinance. And the zoning board of appeals, that's what they do. They have the authority to grant that variance. So regardless of what happens here tonight, okay, what you hear today.
That's still an option.
That is still an option. And if you can present, you present a logical case about where this is located relative to your neighbors, the visibility, the relative size. Now, most people, when they think about dumpsters like what's at my condominium complex, which is approximately maybe 8 feet wide by 6 feet deep by about 6 feet tall. Okay, that's a whole lot different than a what'd you say? How big?
It's 3 by 5. It's a little bit less than 5 and a little bit less than 3, but 3 by 5
How
is
tall? How?
about to here.
Okay, about 3 feet. Okay, that is a whole. Okay, that's the sort of difference. Okay, that might when presented to the zoning board of appeals get them to or convince them to grant a variance. So, but again, the zoning board of appeals, they have their own standards and they make their own decisions, independent of what we do.
Okay.
So again, regardless of how this discussion goes tonight and whether this board decides we want to change the ordinance or not change the ordinance, get back with Brian or Lori, okay, and they can point you in the right direction for a zoning board of appeals application, and you can if you want to go that route.
Okay.
That would be entirely up to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for the pastor at this point? Okay. Then thank you, sir. Mr. Loftus.
I meant to point out.
He's about a head taller than me, but.
That would have been useful information a bit ago.
So this way I don't have to put glasses on. What's the cost of going to ZBA? I hadn't thought about bringing it, but there is a.
I am really not. Brian, do you know? Lori, do you know?
$625.
Okay.
That's why I didn't
Does
go.
Okay, so it becomes
I can't use donors.
Okay, well,
money.
time out on that. I know from having been on ZBA for 11 years that there are instances, particularly for nonprofits, where the zoning board of appeals has the authority to waive that fee.
Okay, I was
whether they would choose to do that or not, again, is up to them.
Can I address that? I actually went downstairs to the office, asked if that could be waived, and was told no.
Okay, well, I'm not surprised.
So I can't spend the money this way.
The Zoning Board of Appeals has the authority to waive fees if they choose to do so. That I know because I was there. Okay, staff will tell you exactly that answer because they don't want that going to ZBA, but again,
Okay.
the Zoning Board of Appeals has a lot of authority. I'm sorry, Mr. Loftus.
Oh, no, that's, we're kind of circling around to some of the things that just I'm uncomfortable with in my job. We have ordinances that we haven't touched in decades. We haven't enforced in decades. That's bringing us around, unfortunately, the situation and the island-wide we are today that we are enforcing ordinances. And people who have been in a house for 15 years and they don't understand, why they can't keep their boat in their front yard, which they've had for 15 years. It's because we haven't enforced the ordinance. We get different answers. We have been giving different answers from different people for a while. Well, if you get all your neighbors to sign a release, we'll let you leave it there. Well, that's not what the ordinance says, but we didn't enforce it. Getting back to the ordinance in the instant case, though, nobody knew why we had that ordinance. And I asked Brian, I asked our code enforcement. Nobody knew why we had that ordinance. Well, maybe that was the ordinance we adopted from another community, or it was just the one to have at the time. Maybe vinyl wasn't available when that was when that ordinance was adopted. But nobody really knew. But we have it, and it's our ordinance, and we're gonna abide by it. But let me show you just a little bit of. Oh, that's not the one I want. Where did it go? I did put this on the. It's just a little different format here. I did take some pictures. The purpose of this ordinance is for appearance. Right? We want to maintain a certain standard of appearance in our community, and this is it. Where are my pictures? That's you. Okay, that's why I can't find my pictures there, but I've got, there it is. I should have put my glasses on. So this is, and one that complies with. This is right here at the edge of the parking lot in Township Hall. And it presumably complies. It's masonry. The brick matches the brick of the building, and it has a wooden door in it. There are no bollards or anything to prevent a collision, but this is one that's in compliance. I'm getting back to the idea of the appearance is what the purpose of these enclosures are. So, all right, let me see if this will do a slideshow for me. This is a dumpster enclosure I took at a marina down in Ohio. It's in vinyl. Now, I think if you want to compare the appearances between the two, I think this one wins hands down. There are no immediate buildings that match this, so it's kind of a standalone, and depending on where this takes me for my next picture, that's not the one I want yet. Okay, this is a same marina enclosing a storage area. There's evidence of a little bit of damage there, not by anything coming or going, more likely from a mower, but it's not particularly visible or, anyway, it's there. So moving along, this is a wooden fence. I'm going on to the appearance. This is what a wooden enclosure would look like were it done with the wood recommended in our existing ordinance. And this is taken this morning, judging by the fresh snow. And let's see, this one will take a little more eye strain, but it's a fence along East River Road. It's a vinyl fence, privacy kind of fence. It's 6 foot high. But appearance-wise, I think it wins, or long term will win hands down over this. So circling back to the appearance idea of it, I think the vinyl will win and will maintain the appearance for a much longer period of time with all the other constraints that you have. Is it appropriate for the neighborhood? Is it appropriate for the mission at hand? In terms of durability, obviously if you hit a wooden fence with a dumpster, the fence is going to lose. Trust me, you hit a masonry fence with a dumpster, that masonry fence is going to crumble too unless it's heavily reinforced with every slot in cinder blocks grouted and rebar, which is not a constraint we have. So it's going to crumble those also. So the durability factor, masonry would probably be ideal. It may be easier to repair, but I think you could repair a vinyl enclosure 6 or 7 times for the cost of one repair on a masonry one. And I'm just throwing that out. There is a fencing company here that sells vinyl enclosures, and Dale researched this and said, yeah, we sell a lot of dumpster enclosures that are out of vinyl. He didn't say where, and Dale didn't get that information. So, going back to the intent of the ordinance is to improve the appearance, to preserve the appearance. I think vinyl can meet that requirement. I think it will have every bit the durability. If you're worried about the loading vehicle backing into it, which is always a concern, installation of bollards could protect it from that. And otherwise, if the guys drop the dumpster on it, they're going to pay for the replacement of it, and it's going to be just as destroyed as a wooden or a masonry one. So, the idea, pastor's trying to keep his costs down, trying to have long-term appearance, that the church should be proud of. And he asked about vinyl. I couldn't find an answer to my satisfaction as to why we didn't allow vinyl. We allowed masonry, obviously, would have the best appearance if that's what we're trying to emulate. And wood was probably, when the ordinance adopted, was the other option available. We have another option available, and I wanted it done here to preclude the cost of ZBA, and also to encourage, if more businesses want to have dumpsters and want to keep their costs controllable, that we have the vinyl option open for them if it's appropriate in their individual cases. So a change of the ordinance, and believe me, I'm going to have plenty of ordinances we're going to be looking at, because as we're dusting these off and actually enforcing them, I'm scratching my head saying, why are we running the township this way? And fortunately, we got a great board this time, and we want to fix things. So anyway, that's my case, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Loftus. Question for Mr. Loftus.
Oh, come on.
No. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
All right,
Why don't you just have a seat, and we'll
Thanks
discuss
for
it
hearing me
here
out.
and see what transpires. Okay. Let's go around the table and see what people think about this. And basically, what we're talking about here is the issue of whether, in fact, we want to open up for future ordinance change work, a modification to the zoning ordinance with respect to the construction of the dumpster enclosure. So, in the end, I would like to be, after everybody's had a chance to talk, we're not going to take a formal vote, but I'd like to reach a kind of a consensus one way or the other. Do we proceed to consider a change, or do we park the issue? Okay, that's what we're trying to get to here. So, we're going to start over here first with Mr. Frucci.
My thoughts on it are rather, well, I was going to say simple, but I tend to not make anything simple. I am obviously concerned with the maintenance. One of the things that I was actually thinking about some of the activities that Mr. Loftus has been doing to try to enforce some ordinances that haven't been. And one of the issues that we have struggled with for decades has been enforcement of maintenance sorts of things. If things are broken, they might have been in great shape when they were built, but they're no longer in great shape, and somebody then has to follow up and knock on somebody's door and say, fix this. And so I'm very sensitive to those things. I also, see that brick and mortar is going to be more stable, but again, a dumpster of that size, of some of these massive ones, is going to beat any material that we put out there. I think vinyl is probably marginally weaker than wood, but neither one of them is going to win against the dumpster. What I found actually most compelling, which is probably not the intent, is the idea of protecting this, as Mr. Eubank indicated and as Mr. Loftus suggested, things like parking dividers, whatever those things are called, or bollards, can protect, in a large case, really any material we put out there, that's put out there. So I guess what I would be interested in is something that suggests that they can be of any material that's suitable to the construction and matches the existing buildings, provided that enough protection is made that they are reasonably assured to be protected from damage, easy damage, or something like that, that then we can look at and say, bollards, parking meter things, whatever those are, that would keep people from hitting them easily, would be interested. And then whatever material they're in, there's probably going to be better protected than just a blanket that has to be built out of brick or wood. So I'd be for looking at it in some way, because over time, I do think vinyl is going to withstand time better.
Thank you, Jay. Jim?
I guess when I think about it, visibility is probably the first thing that I think of that would be important to me as a resident or a neighboring company or just a resident in general. Vinyl to me seems okay. When I look at the way the ordinance read before, where you were allowed to have wood, even though it was treated wood, the construction is probably the same. It's going to be these 4x4 posts with some kind of wood between. These are going to be 4x4 posts. I'm assuming those are wood posts that they put into the ground, and then vinyl is what you put between it. So you can power wash it, keep it clean, keep it nice. So I don't see a huge difference between the wood and the vinyl. Durability, once again, between the wood and the vinyl, I just think if you have wood, you're going to be staining it. In anything that I have wood, I have to stain every 5 to 10 years to keep it nice. So masonry, once again, though, once you touch this, right, because when I think of Macomb Street and we have somebody build a huge dumpster, they want a huge dumpster, it's Kroger's. You know, I don't know how we can look at this differently, because I don't know if I want Kroger's having a vinyl siding, or if it matters at that point in time. I have to think that through a little bit more. But as far as the church, I would think that the vinyl would be adequate. So it's interesting, but once again, I kind of agree that there probably wasn't vinyl at the time when this was written, and we could probably add it at this point in time. So I don't have much more.
Thank you, Jim. Let's go down to Steve.
My thoughts are this is probably a pretty simple one-meeting discussion. Definitely in favor of looking at the ordinance. Right now, it clearly states there's only 2 acceptable materials. So I think if we want to look at it, probably just meet for one time, see if we have a scalable type solution for where we go with this from then. But it doesn't solve your situation today. You either can do it following the ordinances or not follow the ordinances. It's your call. You probably could have it up already by tomorrow. But it's probably a simple, real scalable solution. We put into the ordinances, call it all those different concerns people have said, and get done with it in one meeting.
Thank you. Brian?
I'm going to echo everyone else's comments. I'm not going to reiterate them all, because I think they made valid points. I'm definitely in favor of looking at this. I think any time that we can offer more choices to our residents and homeowners and businesses, I think it's great. Potential for the cost savings. Again, anything can be destroyed. And I think it's worthwhile to look at other materials, like Jay was saying. So things that come to my mind, not being builders, like well, what about cement board or hardy plank or something like that? That's used in combination with wood or other materials. But again, a scalable solution where you're looking at the intensity of use at the site specifics, I think it's great, and we should be looking at that.
Thank you, Brian. Mickey?
Is this on? I never know. I like the look of the vinyl a lot more. I think it looks a lot cleaner. And I looked at similar products for a deck, and I was surprised at what they have out there right now. They have so many different options, and it's actually, I think, a lot more durable than it used to be. I don't know what we have the ability to do today if this is just something that we have to look at, or if we do have the ability to do some type of variance. But I think this looks a lot better. If it doesn't work out for you, I'd like to volunteer my husband to put up a wood fence. So I'm sure we can find some people to help.
Thank you, Mickey. As far as having any planning commission authority on this to make any sort of a change tonight, the answer is no, we do not.
That we have to discuss it, right?
It takes there's a formal process for it that takes time. Eric?
Yeah, so dumpsters are not right uses, right? This has become a special land use, so I would be fine with including a clause or changing the ordinance that the planning commission would have the ability, depending on the site considerations that we talked about, aesthetics, is this in a residential neighborhood, what's the size of the dumpster, et cetera. The planning commission would have the ability to make a change to that. So I'd be fine with changing the ordinance. Vinyl was definitely around when we wrote these ordinances, but it was much different material at that point in time, and certainly is more durable. I think this is probably okay for a small dumpster. Well, this is not going to be okay for a larger, more industrial dumpster. So that's why I feel like the planning commission would be a good place to put this area into. And I guess kind of along those lines, one more thing is, the ordinance is not just to protect the surrounding the surrounding areas, are also to protect in some cases the people putting this up, right? So you wouldn't want to just carte blanche say, yeah, vinyl's okay for everything, and then all of a sudden these vinyl enclosures are going up and getting dinged, and then it's bad on our ordinance that is not protecting the people who have put this up. So that said, one thing I would like for the next time, if this does come back, Brian, is, we've looked at different ordinances, but what do the different waste companies say about enclosures? Right? I mean, what are the physics that they are dealing with?
Thank you, Eric. Well, several thoughts about this. First, just a question. As opposed to going through all this aggravation of coming to the planning commission and all that, did you consider just building a treated wood enclosure? And if you didn't, why not?
Yes, we thought about the reasons for not building the wood one were the ongoing maintenance we'd have to do in order to keep staining it every couple. You said 5 to 7 years. I agree with that number. And I wanted to be able to put up something that basically, other than washing it down, I wouldn't have to deal with, really ever again. Just in terms of the volunteer hours and things like that. I don't want to use the limited resources, both financially and volunteer hours wise, taking care of dumpsters. I'd rather be, doing good stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I probably wouldn't have thought much about dumpsters and dumpster enclosures until I became president of Park Lane Villas Condo Association. And it just so happens we have three dumpster enclosures that apparently predate the current ordinance because they're made out of steel panel, wood frame, steel panel with the gates in the front, just like the pictures that you see here on the screen, except with that material of construction. The dumpsters that are in that complex are large, probably triple what's being talked about here. Probably 10 feet long by maybe 8 feet deep, and it's over my head, so they're tall. Okay, and these things are picked up once per week. We've had experience with 2 separate waste haul companies, one being Waste Management, which I think the township uses, and the second one is Republic. And the experience we've had from a durability standpoint, these people that drive these trucks are, well,
Not sure what to
they're, yeah, and
They're probably in a hurry.
Yeah, you can say that. Absolutely, they're in a hurry, and they're not that careful. We have had damage from that reason. We've had one hit with a car. We've had a lawnmower issue. Okay, and whether you think, well, steel, nothing will happen to that. Well, something does happen to steel. Okay, and vinyl would not be any different than that. So, in terms of, at least in our application, whether we had steel or whether we had wood or whether we had vinyl, the impact for the association would have been virtually the same. Damage, and in fact, it got so bad with some of the gates that we got slidable pieces that we could put in the front gates, okay, because the damage was so frequent, okay? And the idea that you can go back to a Waste Management or Republic and get a refund, you might as well forget about that. That one, okay, we tried that, okay? It takes a year if you're even halfway successful, okay? So it is not a garden path to have this kind of material. It's not a garden path to have what we have, which is the steel. Beyond that, the concern that Brian had about appearance. Over time, what's happened is the steel is the siding, the painting on it, the coating on it, it starts to rust, and so we have to paint it. And the wood in the back, which is treated wood, like what you're talking about, starts to deteriorate as well. And although we have not addressed it, we're going to have to address it again for the point of maintaining the appearance of the complex. Okay, trash bins can't look trashy, even though that's what they're for. So, I don't know that there's one solution out here that fits all circumstances and would solve all these problems. And in some of these cases, the brick, I'm sure, wouldn't have helped us. Okay, when the car hit it, okay, that wall was not going to be stable either, and it would have required repair. But perhaps the minor things that happened would have just simply bounced off. I don't know. So, I certainly am willing to look at this along with the rest of the commission. But I do want it. I definitely agree with Jim's point. Okay, we have to be very cautious about this because an application that fits a church with a small dumpster in a rear yard that's secluded, like that church is, in contrast to a dumpster by Savon that's at the edge of a parking lot, or Kroger's, which is a huge dumpster, and is both of which are visible to any countless number of people going by every day. Having something in there that isn't as sturdy as you can make it, okay, would be doing a disservice. Because again, Jay made the point about the difficulty of maintenance, of getting someone to maintain something. Okay, Brian and the board are working on that now, and contributing to the problem. I don't think would be necessarily helping the board to do the things that they want to do with the ordinance. So, for me, it's a big balancing act here, and I want to make sure that whatever we consider, we'll have to consider this, in a fashion that meets the needs, not only of the situations like you're talking about, but the broader needs of the rest of the community for the businesses and along Macomb Street. And so, on that basis, I will support this. But I think it's more than just simply adding a line that says, treated wood or steel plate or vinyl. It's more than that, and that means we have to look at it. It has to be talked about. It has to be investigated, and we have to consider these factors. So that's my opinion on this. So I guess in summary, I would say from the consensus of the commission is that we should look at this. I guess what I would say is that this probably should, Jim, you and Jay, I think we should get some, have Brian process this. He's heard the concerns and heard the thoughts of everybody, okay, and he knows the intent of what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. Have Brian take a look at some language as to what this would be, and then the ordinance subcommittee take a look at it. Chew it up a little bit, like we always do, and then come back and then present something that passes our muster, at least, to the full commission for their consideration. And we could do that through the normal ordinance process at that point. Jay, what do you think about that? You're the chairman of that committee.
I think that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
I think that's exactly what we should do.
Okay, Jim, are you all right with that?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Brian?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the goal would be that we would have some language together that the committee would have reviewed prior to the next planning commission meeting, and do it in such a fashion that we can have enough time to go ahead and basically, rather than bringing it back to the commission for discussion again, okay, what I'd like to do is bring it back to the first step, which would be the public hearing.
Yep.
So that means that we have to back it up enough time so that we have proper notifications. So, given the fact that we're around the holidays, I don't know what the timing is going to be, but Brian, I'd like you to go to work on this. When you're ready, get a hold of me, and then I'll talk to these guys, and we'll see what we can do in the way of a meeting, a subcommittee meeting, and then we'll move on from there to see how it progresses. Fair enough? Okay. As just in general, just as far, an ordinance change takes time. Okay? And so if you have an expectation of going out there next week or even next month and saying, I'm putting up a fence, don't. Okay? Because it's not the way, that's not the way ordinance changes work. There's a process we have to follow, and every step is required, and we take that step. So, this might be a project you would work in the spring. And I guess given the weather, that probably would fit your schedule.
Fair enough. May I ask a follow-up?
Please, come on up. And
The question I have is, this came up for me last May, and that's when I first approached the commission downstairs to say I want to put up a vinyl fence, if I may, and was told the only way to do that was to submit a check first for that question to be done through the ZBA.
Which commission did you talk to?
To the building commission folks downstairs. I don't know the proper name, but I just went up to the desk.
Oh, Lori, did he?
Department of Public Services.
And at that point, I was told in order for any kind of variance to be considered, in order to go before the zoning board of appeals, that the church had to submit a check for, I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood, $600 to $800, somewhere in that ballpark. Right. And that's when I balked and said, all I want to do is ask the question and see if I can do something. I can't use people's donations that way. That's not a good use. So that's when I went to Brian and asked him, why can't I do this? How does this work and whatever else? And so at this point, I'm hearing for the first time tonight that those fees can be waived. And
at the discretion of the zoning board of appeals.
Absolutely. But then secondly...
But that's only after the fact, by the way. You can't get on the agenda unless you write a check, and then the ZBA then decides whether, in fact, you have to pay.
I understand that.
Okay.
But one of the other things, and maybe I'm just obtuse, but I couldn't find that anywhere in the descriptions of how the ZBA works when I went on to Grosse Ile's website and so forth. So I couldn't find that in writing that they could do that I could ask for that or anything of that nature. And so I'm hearing about this for the first time tonight.
Well, I'm telling you from my 12 years of experience on ZBA, and we did it. Brian, talk to that issue, please.
There is nothing in writing, certainly, and if the ZBA did that at their discretion, then that was exactly that. I don't know that I can speak much more to it. We oftentimes, it puts the township in a very tough position because of if we have somebody that gets denied, they'll immediately say, can I have my money back then? And the answer realistically should be no. You went through the process, you read the review standards, you didn't meet the test, you were denied, you can't just get your money back. That money pays for the process. There are hearing notices that have to be done, there are reviews that have to be done. So it's not that simple to just give them their money back if they do not get what they've asked for.
That's why it's infrequent.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry to
Go ahead,
interrupt.
please.
But I think the request would be, and maybe that request has to be made afterwards, would be to have that amount refunded, win or lose, on the basis that it's a
not-for-profit that's asking.
Not-for-profit that's asking for it, and a relatively simple request. I understand. I guess the question would be, I guess what the pastor would want to know is this a real possibility, or was the experience that our chairman has had no longer the case today? And I guess what I would suggest is maybe between Brian, and Lori, the three of them should probably be able to figure out whether that's something that's going to be a possibility. Maybe talk to the chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals before a further approach is made, because I think that our chairman is correct. It's going to be, even if we act on the next meeting, which probably isn't going to be a month from now.
No.
Probably going to be more than that.
Yeah.
that would be the first that you would get the approval. And the way it stands right now, our ordinance, right or wrong, is clear.
Oh, absolutely.
and our rules also are clear that we can't change the ordinances without a public notice and a hearing and all that sort of thing. So the people that can make it happen faster are ZBA, but they also cost money. So if there's a way to avoid it, I think that would be a reasonable approach. But I'm not sure. And we don't control the ZBA; they're a separate organization.
Exactly right. The fees, however, are driven by the township board. They're the ones that set the fees for all services rendered by the township.
Fair enough.
So I hope we've been helpful tonight. At least we've clarified the issue, if nothing else.
Thank you.
But I wish you luck, and I hope you can accomplish what you want to accomplish in a manner that you hope to be able to accomplish it. So,
thanks, John. I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
And thank you, Brian, for coming around tonight. Good to have the township supervisor here.
I'm sticking around because I'm interested in these other two.
Oh, okay. All right.
Mr. Chair, if I might,
yes, sir.
On the topic, somewhat building on the topic we were just talking about, our supervisor suggested that he has ordinances that he's interested in reviewing, and we, as you know, have been, I was going to say actively, maybe somewhat actively, reviewing our ordinances as we do on an ordinary basis, but also maybe a little more aggressively, kind of going through our ordinances, looking for ways, places where improvements can be made. It would, as the chairman of that subcommittee, I'd be interested in the supervisor's thoughts on which ordinances ought to receive our attention, because that's one of the things that we did is we went through and we kind of made a list and then ranked them on priority based on complexity and urgency and just kind of working our way down the list. And so I'd be interested in other people's thoughts on that, including the supervisors, because he's obviously put some thought into those things as well. So
certainly, if you have a list of things that you would like the Planning Commission to consider, by all means, put them in writing if you would, and get them to Lori and to Brian, and we'll take a look at them relative to other things that we're working on. Okay, that's a good suggestion, Jay. We always want input, no doubt about it. Okay, let's move on. Let's take the electronic changeable message sign for gasoline prices next. This is one that was in the same email that Brian had relative to the waste receptacles. So the issue here is that a new party has bought the gas station there at the corner of Meridian and Macomb. And the request came in that in terms of modernizing that facility, that instead of having the plastic signs that you go out and you change the price on every other day, they wanted to do what other gas stations have done in other communities, and that is to be able to press a button and put the new price up, electronically. Well, that ran into the ordinance standard that we have that deals with message signs, electronic message signs. Where you see in the communities where there'll be a big panel and there'll be flashing messages up there, and we decided a long time ago that was undesirable for our community. So in our ordinance standards, we basically banned those kind of electronic messaging signs. And this changeable message sign, specifically for the gas station, fell into that category. So the question came to the Planning Commission: would we consider changing our ordinance to allow that sort of sign for that kind of application? Okay, I put the question to Brian. Brian then wrote this message, this email letter back to us. And if you would, please talk about it and what your thoughts are.
Sure. Be a little bit more brief on this one, probably. There's not a lot to it. You've given pretty much all of the background. The community development received an application for a new sign. That's where this came from. And when we reviewed it, staff informed the owner, the applicant, that we could not approve it as is, However, based on the conversations that we had with administration and some follow-up conversations with the commission, we did inform them that we would be willing to bring this in front of the commission to see if this was something the township might be interested in. It is certainly a more common trend. You see them more frequently. It certainly adds to ease of use. It allows them to increase the prices on us much more quickly. That's a joke.
I didn't hear or decrease. I didn't hear that.
Which they have been, by the way. Thank you, gas station people. I drive a lot. I'm sorry. So, wow, I'm really digressing now. So, anyway, it is a trend we've seen. I do have some communities I work with where we still prohibit the full-fledged electronic changeable message reader board signs, but have made some allowances to incorporate LED signage strictly for gasoline prices. My concern when the application came in was that while I may think it's okay, I think it's a slippery slope, and I did not want the township to start to slide in that direction, only because the very next person would come in and say, well, they have LED incorporated into their sign, now I want it too. And instead of strictly being a static price sign that would change once a day, once a week, whatever it might be, we're dealing with something that's far more complicated and it really has the negative effects we're looking to avoid. So I brought it in front of the commission. I think as we've envisioned this, it would strictly be an amendment to the ordinance only for gasoline prices on gas station signs. Ultimately, and I'm just going off the top of my head, remembering where I am tonight, I believe there are two that would be affected by this. So it's not an earth-shattering change. This is not something that is going to have island-wide ramifications. But for those two businesses, it may be something, if it's technology that they would be interested in incorporating, and if the commission, the administration, and the board see fit that it's a direction you'd like to go, then certainly we could do so. And really that's what it comes down to, is it becomes, is this a direction you want to head down? To allow it, or are we comfortable with where we are now, which is strictly, again, a flat prohibition, and having the sort of, I guess they're like, the little plastic stick-on or slide-in number panels.
Thank you, Brian. But I definitely would commend you for avoiding the slippery slope. When you get into that issue where you start modifying the wording, that leads to nothing but accusations of favoritism and discrimination. And so stick to the rules, and if the Planning Commission wants to propose the change on the ordinance, then that's the right way to go. Okay, let's get comments. We'll start with Mickey.
I just wouldn't want to see a huge flashing sign. I mean, even if it were small and discreet, you still have slippery slope, but I guess I just imagine driving by with the big flashing sign, and I just don't care for how that looks.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I'll just jump in real quickly. I apologize for stepping in, but
please.
Flashing is prohibited. You cannot have flashing signage. So the intent here would strictly be static gas price, nothing more. It obviously could change, whether it changes in the morning, whether it changes at night, whatever the case might be. But that would be it. They would not be allowed to scroll messages, flash messages, have prices blinking as though they're cheaper than someone else, whatever the case might be. It would literally just be a static LED sign.
But right now it's all prohibited, right?
Correct.
So, I mean, just to even consider it, I would be concerned and would want a lot of things written in so that it couldn't have any of those characteristics.
That's already written in your ordinance.
Okay.
Thank you, Mickey. Steve.
Similar to my question earlier in regards to scope, I know you said there's only 2 gas stations, so the ordinance does not include the marinas that pump gas. They would not put up a sign that affects those folks on East River or anywhere else?
Do they have gas station signage now?
You can fill up your gas there, so this would allow them or not allow them to put up a sign advertising.
Where is this?
Yes.
Elbow Bar? Elbow Bar? Auto gas? Boat gas?
Yes.
Oh.
So the scope of this.
Okay. I'm a little slow. Sorry about that.
So if they I mean, I just don't know if the ordinance covers that property or not, but, if you're 100 yards into the channel, you could easily see there's gas there, and back to your slippery slope comment.
My intent, obviously, is not to include that. There are, I don't believe they would be considered a fueling station. They may have gas pumps as accessory to their marina, but that's not their primary business.
And public.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's worth looking into. Obviously, not anything that's come up for consideration. Could probably go either way. My intent certainly was not that it would include that. This was for gas stations. I wouldn't consider the marina that happens to have gas a gas station.
I would just make sure we put the scope of it in the ordinance and quick vote change, and we're good to go. That's all.
Jay?
Yeah, like Mickey, I'm sensitive to this topic. I was one that pushed for banning these things entirely. Having said that, I wasn't thinking about the gas station signs. I think I think it would be fine as long as they're not flashing, they're not moving, they're not changing, not scrolling, whatever, all the things that we don't want them to do that I think you're aware. But then also, it obviously would be covered by the overall sign requirement, size requirements for signs, but also maybe bake into there some restriction on the size of the LED portion of it, which would be smaller than the overall sign requirement. Sure. Something of that nature. So we wouldn't want big, filling the whole screen, prices in bright flashing, or, bright red. And then the other thing, to address Steve's point, maybe, I don't know if it could be limited to Macomb Street district only or something along those lines, just to take that question off the table.
No, we'll sort that out. Unfortunately, I don't have my ordinance book in front of me, but we will sort that out, because there's a section, there's a paragraph specific to gas station signage. So that's my intent would be to amend that section if that's the direction you want to go.
Yeah, for what it's worth, right now, the only signage at Elmar is a flag that goes up that says gas open. So,
Okay.
That's right. Now that they hear this, it's...
Thank you, Jay. Let's get on to Brian.
I'm in favor of investigating this. I agree with the spirit of making it electronic, but I think the key word is static. And so, the devil's in the detail, and I think making sure that not only is it just the number, just the actual price, but also something that you're not flashing, first of all, the regular price, then the mid-grade, and then, all the other, fuel types. So that way it is just static. So maybe just the words themselves are not LED, and only the numbers can be LED.
That's exactly the intent, and that's how we've written it into other communities' ordinances, that it's that specific with those parameters as well.
Thank you, Brian. Jim?
I think great points all along. Steve, great point. I definitely have to think about that. We wouldn't want to see this showing up at Elmar. So, but once again, these are very common. What I'm envisioning is these small, static numbers for gas price. Easy use. I can think for the operator, it's got to be way easier to click a couple buttons every morning when gas is changing versus going out and having to manually change those. I was actually on the committee when we actually wrote the original ordinance, which was, I guess the vision was we didn't want to look down Macomb Street and see, have it be like Christmas, right, and everything flashing. Something we may want to think about also is, if the gas station is closed, is it possible to write in that we could actually either dim it or have it off when the station's not open, so that way in the evening when it's dark, you just don't even see it at all. So, and then obviously I'd like to restrict it to gas only. I'd hate to see, Save-On saying, well, if they can do gas price, then I want to have my milk price, because I don't want the price of milk when I drive down Macomb. So certain things we might want to think about, right? But definitely would love to dig into this, whether we do it in a subcommittee or not. This is why we're here. So.
Okay. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm on board with almost all the comments already so far.
Okay.
Oh, come on.
I don't care to see two different milk signs for prices of milk.
2%, 0.5%.
Okay, clearly consensus is that we want to look at this, and I would suggest, Brian, that when we talked about the previous topic going to the subcommittee, let's at the same time address this as well. So when we bring this forward, we'll bring both forward at the same time. Is that all right? Jay, you okay with that? Okay. Brian? All right? Okay. Then that completes that topic. Let's go now to the Bayview Waterfront Lot Study. A little background on this. Several years ago now, exactly how many I'm not quite sure, but I think it's like 6 or 7. Yeah. We got a request essentially from the Zoning Board of Appeals, who was seeing a lot of appeals from the Hickory Island Company, where the lots were narrow, where the zoning ordinances, which were written for essentially a zoning district, which really didn't match up with the way the lots were, with the way the buildings were, and all. And the result of that was that anybody who wanted to do anything down in the Hickory Island Company literally had to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals to get anything. Okay, and that's not the way ordinances are supposed to reflect the neighborhood. So this commission took it upon themselves to redraft and create a new zoning district specifically for those folks and that section of the island, Hickory Island. And since that time, okay, the number of variances, the difficulty of people who want to improve their property or change their property to do so, it became administrative. Okay, rather than having to go stand in front of the Zoning Board of Appeals, which we already heard tonight is a rather expensive, lengthy process. So we accomplished that. Well, recently we were approached about a section of the other portion of Hickory Island, which is the eastern portion. Eastern? Western. Western portion. One way or the other. That basically had similar construction, lot sizes and housing alignment and this sort of thing. And they had a similar situation with the Zoning Board of Appeals. So the question was raised whether we would consider modifying or extending essentially the standards in that new zoning district we had to include some portion of the western portion of Hickory Island. Again, with the idea of facilitating making it easier for people to do things with their property and still work within reasonable guidelines. Okay, so on that basis, none of us knew the answer to the question because we didn't have any statistics or any data on lot sizes or any of these issues that were actually being talked about. So we asked Brian to put together a summary for us about what actually is out there and how potentially the zoning standards in the district for the eastern portion of Hickory Island would apply potentially to that side, and how and is there a fit, and is there something that we logically should consider or not? So that was a rather long introduction, but Brian, are you going to give a presentation, or are you going to speak to the email?
I did put some slides together.
Now, I always look forward to your presentations.
Oh, you were one of few. But I appreciate it. And I do just have a few, truthfully.
Okay.
And I'm going to add a point to my next steps, because you did take it one step farther than I've been able to get at this point.
Okay.
So, great intro. There's the west side of Hickory. Turned it on its side, in case some of you need to turn to the side to see that properly. North is to the left. But again, what I wanted to focus on, and at this time, the only thing that we've looked at are the waterfront properties. I think what we'll do is, in the interim between now and the next time we meet to talk about this, there are half as many non-waterfront properties on Bayview as there are waterfront. We'll look at those just to confirm, my suspicions are we don't have the same types of issues on those properties that we do on the waterfront properties.
I would agree with that.
And that's based on looking at the plat map. It's just based on driving the neighborhood, the ZBA occurrences, types of projects we've seen. I don't think we're going to encounter those types of issues, but we will take a look at it just as a side note to make sure we've covered our bases. So what I've done at this point in the process is, unfortunately, I've not gotten into the step of comparing existing conditions to the R1F as drafted. What I wanted to do was to compare it to its current R1B zoning, just to
That's fine.
to confirm my suspicions and some of what we already knew, which was really to gauge the extent of nonconformity in that particular neighborhood. So
Fair enough.
This is just a quick rundown of the base dimensional standards for a conventional R1B zoning. 80-foot lot widths, 16,000 square foot lot areas, a 22% and 20% coverage maximums, FAR, LCR respectively, with the provision that those are the absolute maxes. That number can go down depending upon the size of the homes surrounding them. 40-foot street front setbacks, average shoreline setback, pretty typical. Side yards of 6 and 12 for a combination of 18, and spacing between residences of 18 feet. What we've done so far is Lori and Carol were kind enough to compile all of the assessor data sheets for this particular section of the township, and I then combined all of them, incorporated everything into a spreadsheet so we have a good base data point moving forward. I don't expect you to be able to read this.
Thank you very much.
But I've got it, and I wanted it in here in case we wanted to reference anything specific and or just to show you that I actually did calculate all of this. So I did it. So what we're dealing with is, in terms of what I'm calling kind of our study area at this point, it's comprised of 28 residences, again, along the waterfront only. Let's see if I can get back to that. So waterfront only, Bayview properties, 28 residences in total. The base data tells me 20 of them are non-conforming for lot area. It's a pretty big number, 20 out of 28. In terms of the size of the homes, 13 are already in excess of the absolute maximum floor area ratio, which is 22%, and 12 of them are in excess of the 20% absolute max lot coverage. Again, those numbers would only come down. So if, in fact, the surrounding properties resulted in a calculation under the 22 and 20%, those would then become the maximum. So it's a moving target. It's a little tricky. I went with the easy method. So I'm just letting you know that it would never get higher than 22 or 20 in the absence of Planning Commission approval. And we have several of them, not quite half, but many of them that would not comply with that particular standard. And another feature consistent with what we saw on the East River side is the number of detached accessory buildings and structures in the street front yard. If you think of Bayview, if you've driven down there, the waterfront lots, relatively narrow, not a lot of room for a detached. You're on a waterfront, so automatically your max allowable is 120 square feet, and it can only be in a non-required waterfront or side yard setback, or yard placement, excuse me, not setback. Can't be in the setback, has to meet the setbacks. So what's happened is, over time, they've cropped into the street front yard. Very similar to what we saw. Not quite to the same extent. 11 out of 28 is a little bit less than what we saw on the other side, which was probably like 39 out of 40. There aren't many that don't have detached in the street front yard. So again, what we've got here is we've got high percentages of nonconformity, which is not really what we're striving for. In most of these instances, the lot area isn't a huge issue in that they're developed properties, they're lots of record, so people can still build them, redevelop them, tear down, rebuild, whatever it is that they want to do. The nonconforming lot aspect doesn't restrict them. However, the nonconforming floor area and or lot coverage does. And that's what we found earlier this summer. We had, and that's really what prompted all of this, I believe we had like 4 applications in the course of maybe 10 days for homes on the waterfront on Bayview, one of which went to ZBA, one of which ended up scaling back and worked. It was a ratio issue, and the other 2 of which went away because they couldn't meet the ordinances. So that really was a trigger to us at the staff level to say, something's not right here. We've got people who want to make investments and improvements into their property, and our ordinances maybe aren't quite aligning with their ability and their desire to do that. So that's really what I've compiled so far. That's what this lovely sheet that you can't read says. And what I would like to do is I'm going to have to take the next step, and that's going to be to actually look at the GIS mapping for this part of the township. I want to look at the rest of these items. Lot width is one where I do think we're going to have a number of properties that are under that 80-foot threshold. Front setback, be it both street front and waterfront, we'll look at them. We can calculate them based on the GIS mapping. I'm not that concerned with either of those, truthfully, having driven the corridor, not really a corridor, having driven the neighborhood. I'm not that concerned about those, but since we're already undertaking the analysis, it's just one additional quick step out of many. Side setbacks and building spacing are where I think the lot width and the lot size come into play. You've got an 18-foot spacing and 6-foot and 12-foot side yard setbacks that are intended for 80-foot lots that are 200 feet deep. These are not 80-foot lots that are 200 feet deep. So I have a feeling, a suspicion, if you will, that we're going to see a number of homes that do not meet those requirements as well. Specifically, I think we will have some side yard setback nonconformity, and I'm almost certain we'll have some spacing nonconformity as well. So my goal is to look at the rest of those issues. That will give us basically all of the dimensions that we need. I'm not that interested in looking at building height. That would be another base dimensional standard. I don't believe that's going to be an issue, and I don't think we really want to change your ordinance. You have a 30-foot height max already. I really doubt we have an issue with that. What we do is we have some smaller lots with some bigger homes, and it's, again, created some of these zoning issues for many of those properties. But this is sort of the next step. This is what I'd like to do. Once we have this all incorporated into the table, my next step then would be I'm going to add those to the list. We'll see what type of nonconformity we're dealing with. Then would look, as the chairman suggested, would look to compare that to the standards that were created for the R1F. And if the R1F is a good match and significantly reduces the extent of the nonconformity, then I think we have an opportunity to merely reflect that onto these properties. If it does not, that's when we may have to go Plan B, have some other conversations, decide if we want to do anything in terms of a change and how we want to do so, whether it's by virtue of a new district, again, as was done on the other side. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I don't want to jump too far down the path. I'd like to kind of keep this logical step by step and see where it gets us. And if we already have the proper district in place in our ordinance, then I see no reason why we need to recreate the wheel or reinvent the wheel on this and develop something new. I'm not concerned with having 100% conformity in an older developed neighborhood. That's just something you're not likely to achieve anyway. But what I don't like to see is I don't like to see numbers that are 30, 40, 50, 60% non-conforming. It's too much. It's too much. I don't know that, I don't want to set, I guess what I'm trying to say is, and this is kind of my closing point, I don't want to set the bar so low that everything's into compliance, but now we've said in order to do that, we have 30-foot lots that are 8,000 square feet with 12,000 square foot homes. That's not the direction I want to take this. I don't want to change the character of the neighborhood. I want our zoning regulations to reflect the established character of that particular neighborhood. And that's sort of the same task we took with the other side of Hickory as well.
It's a balance.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Okay, very good. Well, let's go around the table and see what folks think about this. Brian?
I think it makes sense to look at it, but one question I did have was just to make sure that this, if we were to go ahead with some sort of rezoning, would be considered spot zoning.
No, I'm not concerned about that.
Okay.
We're creating a zoning district or applying a zoning district to make it compatible with the way that neighborhood was developed. The master plan calls this area for waterfront residential. We're not really at any issue with that.
Okay. I was just concerned with, since it's a small number of residents, but that's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Mickey?
I think it makes sense to look at it. I mean, if it's, I've driven through the area and I've seen, it's well established. There's not a lot of room to build in those lots or to build additions or anything. But because it's already all established, it's not like you're going to see new homes going up or anything. It makes sense to go back and review our ordinances just to make sure that they fit the majority of those properties. I do think it would be worthwhile to look at and hopefully cut down on the number of appeals as well.
Thank you, Mickey.
Mm-hmm.
Steve?
No further comments. I support looking at it. Nice job. Thank you.
Thanks. Jay?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to look at it. A couple of complicating factors here. Having residents across the street was not something we faced on the other side. And so if we were to allow, say, accessory structures on the street front, it's just going to create more of an issue for those neighbors. Maybe if it gets bad enough, it could be like looking at the back of an alley with all the garages kind of stacked up there. We certainly don't want to make things worse to make things better. And then the other thing is, I don't know if maybe there's a way to segment the street and say maybe the center part of it, just visually looking at it, maybe the center part of it is more like the other side of Hickory, like say from the bend to about 2/3 of the way down, with the ends of it maybe be looking more typical residential. It was something to consider, but I think we ought to look at it, and it may be that there is no way to do this effectively without making it more complicated than it needs to be, but we can certainly take a look.
I'll resort the table by address and see if there's clustering or concentrations of areas that might work. I will be honest with you, at some point, if there is, and we could apply it to 15 out of the 28 properties, but the others are in compliance with R1B, it'll start to look a little funky on the zoning map. And I'm not going to suggest it goes as far as what Commissioner Pollack wanted to make sure we avoid in terms of a spot zone, but I don't want to piecemeal it, I guess. I don't want to do 2 R1F, 1 R1B, 3 R1F, 6 R1B. I do think we need to make sure that we've given consideration to the neighborhood as a whole, such that we don't fall down that path, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Nothing else.
Thank you, Jay. Jim?
I agree. We should look at this further. It's probably going to be very close to R1F, I would imagine. But Jay has a great point. There are neighbors across the street, so interested in going deeper. Thank you.
Eric?
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense to look at it. I mean, it's the same story we had on the other side, and that was what I would deem a success, right? We gave people more access to their property, and it still wasn't fitting with that neighborhood. So yeah, I'm in favor of looking at it.
I didn't come prepared with the numbers. I don't recall a ZBA case since R1F was enacted. And we had monthly ZBA cases with Hickory Island for,
Well, that's a
for
good
some
thing.
time.
That means we solved the problem.
Correct.
And that's what we're looking to do potentially here. Perhaps it's a little more complicated for the reasons that people have talked about, but we'll just have to perhaps study it a little bit more and see what the opportunities are. So I think the consensus is clear, Brian. We're going to want to go to work on this.
Yep.
This is a much longer term sort of activity.
than the other two that we talked about. So I'd like to keep your focus on the first two for the next zoning ordinance meeting. And if you happen to have something that comes along for the next meeting, great. But I don't want to hold up those other two for this.
Oh, absolutely.
This we would like to get accomplished perhaps before the building season next year.
Sure.
Yes, Eric?
Yeah, sorry, just one thing. I know with the other side that there was an association, an active association, and we had, a couple of spokesmen or spokespeople for that association. I'm not sure if we have the same association on this side or not, but if so, we probably want to involve them as well.
There is one. It is not the same. It's not the Hickory Island Company. It is a different association. So we'll, at some point, certainly before we have any type of formal recommendation public hearing, I think we'll reach out to the members of that association, and or we have a couple of residents that we know pretty well in that area too, to see if they can sort of group together, if we can set up a meeting or even just to inform them. We'll definitely come up with a way. Right now, it's probably too premature to warrant too much public input. If that probably didn't come out right, but we always want public input. Looking at the camera. But I want to make sure we have all of our data in place, and that we do have some suggestions and or recommendations of what we might do such that we can get their input on that.
Okay, very good. So, Brian, you're clear on priorities?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, good discussion, folks. Well, it is 9 o'clock, and we normally take a break, but I would like to move and move into the next items and perhaps be able to wrap up in 10 minutes or so if everybody's agreeable. Okay, then we're going to move now to the election of a new Planning Commission secretary. The duties of the secretary are, as an officer, they participate in the concept review meetings that, along with the vice chair and the chair, when applicants need assistance with their applications. That's duty one. Duty number two is they work with the staff, Lori specifically. When the minutes come out, they're prepared by staff, and then the secretary will have a look at them, critique them, interact with Lori on that, so that what comes to us is a polished, fully polished document. The last thing is that the secretary is the actual physical signer. She represents the Planning Commission and signs the documents for the commission. Okay, those are the primary duties. In addition to that, there was a secondary duty which was volunteered, and she chose to do it. The Planning Commission, as I said earlier, has a representative on the Zoning Board of Appeals. And the secretary was nominated and selected to fill that position as well. The two can go together, the two can go separately, but we have to be able to fill both positions tonight. So we're going to start strictly with the secretary functions and see about participation there. Now, I was looking for interested people in this, and Steve over here and I corresponded a little bit about that, and he expressed an interest in becoming our secretary, if that is the wish of the commission. But we're going to go through this as a formal nomination process. I'll open the nominations now for secretary. Are there nominations?
I nominate Steve Lemoyne.
Okay. We have a motion to nominate Steve. Is there a second?
A second.
We have a second from Jim. Are there other nominations?
I was going to anyway.
Okay, hearing none, I'll close the nominations. Entertain a motion. All in favor of Steve becoming our secretary, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Nobody. So congratulations, sir. We appreciate you stepping forward this way. That's a big help for the commission. We'll go now to the second duty, which is the representation for the Zoning Board of Appeals. Now, the Zoning Board of Appeals is not the same as the Planning Commission. It has a whole different set of issues associated with it. It's dealing with people not with fancy site plans and all this. It's people coming forward wanting to do things on their property, and it's a lot more informal. But what it requires is an analytical person who can emotionlessly deal with these issues and not get wrapped up in the noise that comes with neighborhood issues. So it requires clear thinking.
Again, this is, we are required, as one of the duties of the Planning Commission is to represent this commission in that zoning board of appeals process. For example, to be able to come back to the Planning Commission and say, hey, we saw all these variances. It doesn't have to be staff that comes back in and tells us that. It can be the Planning Commission member who is there and saying, this is not right. We need to do something. And informing this commission, and then that drives change that's for the good of the community. So that's what that's all about. And so at this point, I will stop. Again, in talking with Steve, he had expressed an interest in this, if that's the desire of the commission. But we're going to go through the normal process of nomination. So I'll open the nomination for the Planning Commission representation on the Zoning Board of Appeals. Are there nominations?
I nominate Steve.
Okay, we have a motion to nominate Steve. Is there support?
Second.
Okay, are there any other nominations? Anybody else want to potentially be on ZBA? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Once again, sir, congratulations. I think you will have a very positive influence on that commission. They'll be glad to see you there.
Thank you.
Lori, will you make sure that that the communication goes to Jim? Get him the names and the communication. Perhaps, Steve, you even want to introduce yourself to the chair and before the meeting and talk with him and introduce yourself. And Lori, make sure the packages get routed for Steve so he can properly have all the info. Is there a meeting this month?
No.
Okay, there's no meeting in this month, so plenty of time to move ahead. I suspect probably that there won't be one until January or February. The same thing has happened to them that's happened to us. Basically, we only meet when there is an actual need to meet, okay? And they're the same way. If they don't have any applications, they don't meet. There's no use taking people's time or spending township money. So, I suspect the load will be quite light for the time being.
Perfect.
Particularly if we fix, things like what we talked about earlier.
Mr. Chair, can I just jump in real quickly?
Oh, absolutely.
I just wanted to toss out one point since the supervisor is here as well. Technically, the appointment to the Zoning Board of Appeals will have to be confirmed and done by the Township Board. Essentially, the way we've done it is Planning Commission has put forth a recommendation, but only the supervisor and board can actually technically appoint somebody to that board. So
that's interesting because, originally as chair, I was required to participate on the Zoning Board of Appeals, and I did for many, many years until I simply became tired. And then the choice was, do I continue to stay on the Planning Commission as chair and not participate in Zoning Board of Appeals? And then this commission voted to allow the process of being an alternate, and that became Ann Jaworski, and that never went in front of the Township Board.
The only thing
So
I can
what
think of
changed?
is the act changed. The zoning enabling legislation changed. It was previously it was under the Township Rural Zoning Act. So I can't speak to what the prior act stated, but that's the current statute would require that membership on the board be done by appointment of the
Even though by the State Enabling Act it says the Planning Commission has a representative.
Still has to be appointed by the board. And that's how we've done it.
Okay, I guess things have changed. Okay, well then what we will have to do is have Brian, will you prepare a motion, please, for Eric to present to the Township Board at their next meeting to approve the recommendation from the Planning Commission for Steve's appointment to ZBA. Eric, will that suit you?
Yeah. Next board meeting is the 8th of December, and I think end of this week is the publication deadline, so it should be fine.
Okay. All right, Brian?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Steve, you all right with that?
Yes.
And
No
no,
motion.
you don't have to show up at the Township Board meeting for this to happen, by the way. So, unless you just want to be.
I try to be visible there.
Oh, okay. Smile a lot. Okay.
Should we elect an alternate in case they turn him down?
Oh, that's cruel. All right. That completes the appointments and nominations. So that moves to the next meeting date. And I did not present any specific dates down here because I know in January, we won't meet, we never meet in December. We have no applications pending at the moment. January, as I recall, is a difficult month. Again, I think I think there's a holiday in there. There's the third Monday, so we typically defer back out into February to come back for the next meeting. I would like to gear that around again. If there are applications or things that are driving it, not the least of which would be potentially these ordinances that we talked about tonight. So let's see what comes first: ordinances or a new application, and then what I will do when I interact with Brian. We'll pick a potential date. Lori will notify everybody, and we'll then work toward availability, if that works.
Yes.
Okay? So nothing now until February at the earliest. So on that note, that completes the chair's report. Is there anybody who would like to add anything at this point? Okay, then I would entertain.
One thing. Sorry.
Oh.
Really keep you from getting home, but I just wanted to say that the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission is interested in potentially creating a non-motorized plan. So we're just in the very beginning of that, and we're going to be reaching out to the Township Board and the various commissions to get stakeholders involved with this to make sure that this, if this is something that we agree upon as a township, that we have everybody coordinating on it and getting everybody's input. So I just wanted to let everyone kind of know about that, and that hopefully in the future you might be seeing either myself or another representative from BPAC over here talking a little bit more about our vision for the non-motorized plan.
Very good. Maybe at some point you'll want to come and make a presentation to us.
Sure, maybe.
Maybe. Okay. All right. Any other comments or questions? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So,
Eric? All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.